problems using the pandas, but then I read about it, and then Saad also helped me with it. So then I could, proceed further and I could complete the project. This is
Great.
Vaishali, sir.
Yep. Thanks, Vishali.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so best thing I'll tell you in uh, practical side of it, right? When you start doing the projects, you will get a lot of blockers, be it one library or there are multiple libraries. So the best way to go about is to do a lot of Googling and doing research on that topic, right? Because right now Saad is there, right? If you go in an enterprise, you might not have people who are either aware of what the problems are, or they are very much independent to your project, and so you want to do a lot of research, a trial and error, to see why the uh, error is there and how to resolve it. So the best way is to copy that error and copy paste that in Google search, right? And you'll
Right.
get a lot of context on why that error is there in the first place, and start trying those answers as you deem fit or necessary for your project. You see what makes sense, where you might have gone wrong. Just don't try the first example. Just go through the whole thread. Read what was done, what was working, what was not working, and what were, even if something was working, what were, there are always some catches around it, right? So go through it, and you'll see as you keep moving forward on that, you will gain an expertise that you will be able to identify the errors and know exactly what the issues are.
Okay. Yeah. So one more issue I faced is I was trying to upload my file in GitHub, but there is some I'm facing some. I mean, I could upload it in my distinct profile, but I'm not able to upload it in the beginners track. So I was trying that before
Oh,
the.
okay. What was the error that you were getting?
Actually, uh, I mean, I'm not able to upload the file.
So what you can do is, right, GitHub gives you flexibility of going to the beginner's track and creating a repository there first, right? So create a repository there first, and
Mm-hmm.
then copy whatever file is there through the UI and not through the code. Once you copy the file there, then clone that project into your local, and that should help resolve those initial errors of not getting uploaded. Because sometimes, so what happens is your configuration of GitHub on your machine is directed towards your own independent repository and not towards beginner's track. But once you clone it, it will exactly know the configuration that it needs to push to.
Okay.
I think there was also a the first session covered Git basics. One of the first sessions we did here. So that PowerPoint is also available.
Okay.
And the recording is also there if you want to go with, take a look.
Okay. Thank you. I'll go through.
Okay, so
Hi,
question.
Praj.
Hey,
Vikas here.
hey, Vikas.
Yeah, I have completed this project and I uploaded in GitHub. But I'm just wondering that I uploaded like from my perspective, but I
Yeah.
just want to know that how in enterprise it works, because we are getting result and it's everything, but how is pure object oriented programming works? So that's what I want to know. So if you can look up my project and what are the improvement, if you can suggest me,
Yeah.
that would be
So yeah.
best.
So the plan for this session was that I selected one of the projects,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And while I go through it, I'll suggest improvements and give feedback. And
Yeah.
obviously, you can use that feedback in terms of your project as well.
Okay. Okay. For sure.
And if we have time, we'll open your project as well and go through that as well.
Yeah. Sure. So should I share my screen?
We'll let you know.
Okay.
So yeah, so if we have some time pending after Saad completes his review and feedback, and then we'll see if we have time, we can pick up your project and open it and suggest the improvement. But the improvements basically will whatever Saad will suggest now, and I will pitch in as well. It will be applicable to all the projects, so you can relate to your project on what you might have missed this part or how object oriented work at enterprise level.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Just
So
a
Saad,
question: has anyone completed the second option for the project, who's creating a library? Because I didn't get any submissions for that. Or did anyone attempt it and hasn't completed it yet? Okay, looks like everyone did the to-do one.
no problem. But after this project, make sure that you guys go uh, to keep learning, right? So this is the best way. Think about a scenario that either your company needs or you need, right? And create a library based on that so that you can utilize that library. It might be as simple as going to a website, scraping that website for, let's say, airline tickets, and getting a notification every hour if the airline that you were searching for, the price drops, right? Then you don't have to go to the website to keep checking if the price is dropping for that particular route, right? So you can, this is one example. There are multiple examples that you can use as a real life project, which you can use as well. I created a lot of projects when I started, like a budgeting app that I created for myself, and I then imported all the transactions from the banks and created a visualization on how much where I'm spending using like creating a library, right? So we can create those libraries and we can build on top of it. That will keep you working in uh, basically at enterprise level, right? So when you go for the interview, these will be the questions that will be asked, right? And you will be pretty much abreast of how to tackle those questions because you already did a project. And enterprise is no different. It's going to work on the same real life examples. There might be some uh, tech stack that might be different, like you might be using SQL and the enterprise might be using MongoDB, right? But ultimately the concept remains the same across. I think, Saad, you can start now.
Yeah. I'll just add to that even this to-do project, if you just slightly build it up a bit more, you can do some really interesting things. You can connect it to, for example, a Google Sheets API and automate your interaction with Google Sheets, right? So you don't have to log in to Google Sheets to add something to a sheet. So these little interesting things you can really easily do once you have like a skeleton of functionality. Okay, so the project that I'm going to be covering would be Nadia's project. Is Nadia on call? That's fine. I'll just go over it.
Sad, she's on call. She just messages on chat that she's on call.
Okay, if she can, could she give us an intro of her thought process for this, or if she doesn't want to give it, that's fine as well. I selected Nadia's project because it only uses the pandas library. The code is commented, and it's very clean, so it's easy for everyone to understand. Okay, let's go through it. So this project entirely uses the pandas library, right? Is there anyone who used an alternative to pandas library in this exercise or in this project?
Yeah, I have used SQL.
Oh, so you created I'm guessing a temporary sort of SQL server within the directory, right? And that you interacted with that.
No. I created with SQL my work branch.
Okay. Yeah. So
Oh yeah.
so what's happening here? Let's go to where. So let me first run this and see how we can interact with it. Okay. So we start off. We get a message like this: "Welcome to your to-do list. Would you like to register or sign up. So let's say I want to register. Ask for my username, password. There we go. So I have validated the script. The project is the login information is now saved in a CSV file, which is in this directory, right? Which is in the local projects directly. So if I run this again, I should be able to log in. There we go. So now it accepted my login. It's asking me if I would like to view the to-do my existing to-do list, or would I like to add a new item, right? So since this is my first time logging in, let's add a new item. I want to add one item. And now it's asking me for the date. Now, an interesting thing that you would note that this input is going in as string variables. So as a string variable, which gives us like a place where we can improve. I can add a description. Okay. Now let's see if our to-do was registered. Okay. There we go. So here's the record. So let's go over the code and see what Nadia did and see, where we can make small improvements. This is a really good project. Again, in terms of the code here, it's very clean. It's very easy to understand, and it's commented as well. So let's go through it. So, again, and this is a, Nadia used classes as well. So you can see there's a class for existing account. There's a class for new account. You might be able to make some improvements in there and how you sort of structure it. But the fact that classes are being used here is a really good thing. And again, this is all done with just one external library, pandas, which is also good because for a newcomer, it's easy to understand how the logic is working. So when this script is run, this function is triggered, right? So the function gives you an option to input either R or S. R is, as we saw, for register. S is for sign in. Now, we went over the fact that Python is a case-sensitive language. So you might want one way to improve this interaction would be to make sure that even if the user writes a lowercase r, you capitalize it. And the way to do that would be just writing .upper, and it would be capitalized. So just a small note of how you can improve the interaction part of it. Now let's look at a new account over here. What happens if a person makes a new account? So here we have a class called new account. And when this class is initialized, a username and password is required for it. And this this data is put into a data frame, and that data frame, as you can see, is saved in a directory, which is this project. Now, an interesting thing over here, which is really good, is that there's a verification which checks if this username exists, right? And if that username exists, you get an error, which is username is already taken. Let's see that in action. Oh, I think it was Sadma like 1. I did sign in. 1 second. See, so it's saying that here username is already taken. So that's a good thing. That's a way to keep your CSV file clean and make sure that you don't have duplicates of usernames in the data. And if you have those duplicates, then you won't be able to properly handle logins and registrations. So this was a really good step. And again, another good thing is over here, when successfully a new account is saved, you get a message which says that you've accomplished a certain goal, so that the user knows that he can proceed. Now let's see the logic of what happens when there's an existing account, right? Again, this is a class existing account. When it's initialized, it accepts a username and password. And again, that same data frame is loaded as df. Now, because this is an existing account, we need to match the username that's provided by the user with something that's already in the CSV, and that is this line of code over here. And if it doesn't match, it prints out this error. Otherwise, it's a successful login, and then we ask the user whether they want to view their history of to-dos or whether they want to create a new one. And again, this is another example of a good decision here because this is an invalid option. If the computer doesn't understand the command, it's going to trigger this function. And let's see what this function does. Invalid option. All invalid option does is print this sort of error message. So again, this is like a good step in building a sort of interactive process. Any questions up till this point? Any questions or feedbacks or?
I don't see any chat questions here.
So I have a question. So you did show the function for confirming if the user ID is existing in that list or not. Sorry, yes. I forgot to see if the password, if at all the user enters the user ID right and the password is wrong, is the code there to check the password too?
Okay. Okay.
Because it prints that invalid user ID and password, but so maybe I missed it. I didn't.
Let me just try that, right? Okay, so yeah, that's a good catch. There isn't a check for the password, which should also be there. But again, that's a very simple thing to do. You should just add that condition here as well.
Oh, maybe she did it with.
Oh yeah, she did. I think she did.
It,
yeah. It's commented out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's a good catch. Any other questions? Okay, let's look at what happens when we are making a. Let's see what happens when we want to see the to-do list, right? For someone who's already signed in. Here it is, view to-do. So when the view to-do is triggered, again, a data frame is assigned or initialized or loaded actually. And within the data frame, we look for entries with this username. So the good thing about this sort of setup is that there are basically two tables on the back end. One is handling usernames and passwords. The other is handling the to-dos, right? Another way to make this would be, for example, you could have a different table for each user, which would not be the best way to do things, but this is a really good thing. Both would work though. So again, it looks for the tasks with this username and then just prints them out. If it doesn't find anything, it gives this error here. Sorry, couldn't find any list. Let's see what happens when you do an add to do. Let's look at to do task first. So this is a class to do task, and it starts off by saying that data frame is a global variable here. Again, the data frame is read from to do tasks. And when it's initialized, you can see username, date, time, description is over here. And df2 is append or dot append of df. So something's added to df, right? And what is added to df? You can see these new entries over here, which are these inputs. And then it's saved via to CSV. And you get a record which mentions that as well. And it also adds, this is a really good feature, right? It's asking you how many tasks would you like to have? And based on your answer, it's going to execute this multiple times. So again, that's a good feature as well. So based on what I've shown you, what do you guys think are places where we can improve on the functionality? Let me just say this is a great project because this is like a whole application in just 81 lines of code. So it's very well written and commented, and again, it's using object-oriented programming. But where do you guys think there's room for improvement? Here.
I have a couple of feedback. First, the project is really good, especially when it is using only one library. The reason being, the more libraries you put, the performance gets slower, right? So in order to have a better performance, we use the minimum number of libraries required to execute a project, right? So that's one thing that you can keep in mind whenever you are creating any project, that what is the minimum number of library we can use if there is a functionality that is inbuilt in Python. Like math is one of the library that is inbuilt in Python, but you can find a lot of external libraries on math as well. But the fastest way to execute is using the inbuilt library. If that's not the case, use only the minimal library required to execute your project. Secondly, I would have loved if the logic was separated from the code. In an enterprise setting, right? We don't write everything in one file. We basically make sure that the logic is separated from the execution, or the functionality is separated, because there's not one person who is working on this project, right? There will be multiple people, or even for your own simplicity, right? Tomorrow, if you're creating a project that has thousands of lines, keeping it in one file, you will find really hard to scroll down and find the function that you really require, right? So it's always better to separate the class and separate the functionality that is being executed using that class, right? Uh, so yeah, so these are the top two that I think were my feedback on this project.
No, thanks. Anyone else with suggestions on this?
Sad, for my project, I have used error handling. So what I didn't see, I mean, I saw that else part written for one particular condition, but to handle different type of errors, what I was facing was, if the Excel file is kept open, and I try to run my code, it gives an error. So I have written an exception for that. So something of that sort can be added to this code.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
And also, once you execute the code, right? The exception handling is one of the major criteria for any project implementation. It has to be there. Secondly, anything that you're opening, by the end of execution, you have to close that file, right? So you need to make sure the state that your code was before the execution, it should remain the same as after the execution, in relation to your database, in relation to your Excel file, or any other third-party system, right? You have to close that connection, because otherwise, let's say there are 5 people who are working on this project, there will be 5 connections open, and they will remain open forever, right? So the best way to handle is to make it to a state that was before the execution, and make sure that you're closing all the connections, and you're closing all the files that you're opening.
Yeah. To release the resources for better performance.
Correct.
Yeah. Also, like
but
when
yeah.
you was,
Yeah.
sorry, Hitul here. While Sumit was explaining about the class to separate each of the code, you can create a like user class and a task class or a to-do class something. Over there you can make like right now the definite requirement of our project is very minimal, but in enterprise level like you can either have options of like loading all the list of tasks per user or maybe for all the users, or you're searching for the specific task id, or you're updating, deleting all those things. So if you have a class called task and where all you have mentioned all the functions divided in separate part, then you can easily just call that class object. You create the object and call that function by passing the appropriate parameter for to do the task, and then you can easily maintain, like you can easily maintain your code. It's better to handling a large scale application.
That's a good point. The only thing I would add to that is one thing that you can improve here very quickly is date is handled as a string right now, and that's fine. But a way you can improve it is that you can use the time library that's built into Python, and you can use it to recognize dates or process this entry as a date.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is better, because when in, let's say if you are expanding this project and in future if you want to find out whether your task is due already or how many days left to finish your task and all those things, you can easily manipulate the date time functionalities and calculations.
Okay, great.
I have included that in my project, the date time. So
Yeah,
if
that's good.
if time permits, we can see my project also. It's more or
Okay.
less.
Yeah, that sounds good. Let's get Vikas to show his project, and then we'll see the time, how time works. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
Vikas,
yes,
can you show your project?
yeah,
Just run us through it and the logic of it, and we'll give you feedback on it.
yeah. Yeah, so here is my project. I have used three library, which is MySQL connector to connect my database, and that then date time. And this is a pretty table. It is just for like for my table's output. So you will see once I'll run. So if I'll run my program, so it's asking for if you want to register, login, or you want to just quit. So let's try to register first. So admin, password. So this user is already exist. So it will show that username is already exist. Try again.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
good feature that you're getting the user to try again, right? So you don't want the user to start the program again.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a good step.
So let's try again. Register. It's successfully register. Please log in again. So now let's log in with admin. So then it will ask that what would you like to do? You want to create task or insert task or complete task or check history.
Yeah.
So first I would like to do like I want to view the current pending task. So if I press 1, so this is the pending task which is currently pending, and this is the deadline. So if I'll see the whole history, so this is the whole history. These three are
Yeah,
completed
that's
tasks.
very
Very
good.
nice. Yeah, very
Yeah.
nice.
And this one is a pending task. So let's complete. Let's insert task first. So insert task, enter title, task file, description. Okay. And let's check history again.
Yeah.
So this one is added here. And this also shows like when it is updated.
Oh yeah, so you're capturing the current time as well, right?
Yeah, I'm capturing current timestamp. So if you will see, it is 1932:11. So if I'll complete this like ninth class, oh sorry, ninth ID. So I'll just complete that one, ninth one, and let's check history again.
Good.
So you will see that this is updated on after this time.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is really good. Can you walk us through the code?
Good. Yeah. That's what I was
Yeah.
exciting to see.
Later.
It's really nice, formed nicely. Looks like very clean. Flow is very clear.
Yeah. So here I used DB connector to connect with my database, and it's create database if it is not exist, and also the table. So if you wanna use that, yeah, you can create a database in your system. Okay. And the thing is, I have included everything in single class. So the class is account and pass, and then I'll start from here. So I'm asking input from the user that what would you like to do, register, login, or exit. So first thing is let's say register, and as a parameter I used a current timestamp in MySQL format because MySQL is using only specific format for time. So I have converted it in that format. So if I'll go to date time uh, in today function, 1 second, where is that? Sorry. Okay, register function. So self register. So it's here. So I have just used a query that insert into username, password, and timestamp. So sorry.
So I can give you a couple of feedback. One for sure, as you must have realized that your DB should have a separate class and
Yeah.
independent of your main class, right?
Okay. Yeah.
When I see here register and function, you are inserting the query inside this, right?
Yeah.
It should not be the case. It should be independent of what function register is doing, and then it should be calling DB as a separate class and executing the query in that class.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. And
Right?
for each function, I have used exception.
Very
So
nice.
try and accept. So it will also show what is the error
Hmm.
if the code is exist. And some of the like basic exception that we can figure out, like if the user ID or password doesn't match, then username is already exist. So yeah, I have raised that exception by myself.
So I'll tell you one example I'll give you on this project, right?
Yeah.
Itself, why the need for separate classes, right? Now, let's say you run into an error, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the register side, right? Now
Yeah.
you have to debug this whole function because you don't know where your error is. Is it in the functional code or is it in the database?
Yeah,
So
that's
you
right.
have to
Because I was struggling for error for like 2 to 3 hours, like when I
mm,
started this.
correct. But if you had a separate class for DB, you will exactly know that the error is getting raised in the DB class. So you will actually pinpoint the error much faster than having a single class. So
Yeah,
it will
that's
save a lot of time. Once your code becomes a little bigger, it will save you a lot of time in the long run.
okay. Thank you.
And also
Then,
But
like Separating the connection is main reason to avoid the SQL injections here. Like when you hard code this kind of query, anybody can try to disturb your database, directly get into your query. So it's always good practice to have a separate executions of your query run on the separate class.
Okay.
And one thing that I forgot to mention, right? The importance of configuration file, right? Once, because let's assume your database connection changes, someone
Yeah.
has to really find where you have written that configuration file, because let's say in an enterprise project you have 100 files, right? Now you don't know where someone has written that configuration string, right? So the importance of any project is, whenever you start creating a project, create a configuration file and put all the uh, hard-coded variables in that configuration file. So tomorrow, if anyone or you yourself needs to change something, you just go to configuration file and change that value, right? And it is independent of code. Your code will still work the same way. It's just that you have changed the database, right? So tomorrow, if I'm
Yeah.
changing from SQL to MongoDB, I
Mm-hmm.
don't need to really go into the code to change a lot of things. But I'm just giving you an example, but it's not the right comparison, because MongoDB has different yeah, query parameters. But if they're similar DB and the same
Yeah, it's
queries
a
work,
good practice
right?
to separate
It's
that.
a good practice to separate the configuration from your code itself, right? So three things that needs to be separated in any enterprise project. First, the configuration needs to be separated from any of the logical code, right? Second, your backend, which is your database, should be separated from any execution functional code. These three should be treated as three different projects, right?
And
And then
also, okay, continue, finish.
you basically integrate all three of them together, and that's where what you call, this is a complete enterprise project that I've implemented, right? Because all of the three things are working separately and in conjunction with each other. So if you change any of the one part, it will not impact the other two parts.
Yeah, that's what
Yes.
I want to know, that how it works in enterprise project, because I have just created everything in a single file, so it's a bit complicated.
Right. And it's a minimum
It's
line
really
of codes, right? Once you start adding the functionality, your code will keep increasing, and then you will really struggle in a week's time to figure out what things are going wrong where, and what things are getting impacted because of your code.
Yeah.
and also the reusability of code, like avoid the redundancy. Like if you are running the query to insert some values from 2 3 different places for the same thing, or you are updating a task from many different like operations, you can have just a single place query and you just call it. That's it. You don't need to rewrite again and again the same queries in each of the place.
Correct.
Yeah. Sure. So here I have implemented the login function. So where it is capturing the username from my database. So here it is a credential table. So I have also created timestamp here, so you can see what are the username and when it was created and what are the passwords. Yeah.
Very nice, very nice. So from an overall perspective, right, when you talk about enterprise, the enterprise is not about what code is doing. The enterprise is all about how have you structured it, right? 90%
Yeah.
of your time goes into where do I put this code, right? So that
Maintenance.
it doesn't impact any other code, right?
Okay.
It doesn't break any other thing. So isolating that, if your project from the beginning is working on the isolation patterns and on abstraction layers, plus you have separate responsibilities assigned to each class, then you will exactly know where to put it, because you are not the only one who will be working on that project. Then everyone will be having that ease of mind that if I change this, other things are not going to break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here are the to-do functionality. So if you wanna check the current task, insert task, or complete task, So I have just run one if loop, and I have separated each option with their function, and I have put also like username as a parameter for all of them. So it will be easy to fetch any data from the database or to put any data in the database.
And also,
Yeah.
one thing that is important in enterprise is that whatever code you write, you
Mm-hmm.
create a test, a unit test that tests that code.
Mhm.
Okay.
That is the tester's job, so you must have to learn to write the test.
Not really. I
Yeah,
mean,
kind
most
of
of the
thing I'm saying as a tester point of view, if you are learning
correct, correct,
and to create your automated test script, then yes, that's a good practice to create the test cases.
right.
Yeah. So here
But
is
all in all, very, very, very good effort. Very good effort. Really like
Yes.
this.
so
Yeah,
here are like
it's very detailed.
simple queries for each function. To check a pending task, I have just used few, like I have just fetched few fields from the database, and I have like differentiate pending and completed task by these emojis. It's a
Yes.
square
So
and
on the functionality side, since you have implemented database, right? So it will be
Mhm.
much more easier for you to add filters to your functionality, like uh, how many users created task on a particular date, right?
Yeah.
So those
So
kind of
here is
filter
the full
functionalities you can
database. Yes, sorry.
so you can implement those kind of functionalities with that kind of just a simple query, right?
Yeah. So here I have another database for to-do tasks. So all username in the same file and the status. So I am fetching the data by username, so it will be easy to fetch only particular data.
So here's a question for you on the
Yeah,
database, right? On
yeah.
the database connection, do you keep your database connection open for the entire length of execution, or you keep opening and closing your connection based on what the user is asking?
No, no, no. That I have not implemented.
Right. So this is one thing to consider. If you keep your connection open, if I
Yeah.
say 10 users are on the system and
Mm-hmm.
working on it, in an enterprise, that's not a really a good practice, because then your database will always have 10 open connections,
Oh, yeah.
right? So you implement something that opens and closes with what user is doing as an action, right?
Yeah.
So you have two databases. You might not need two databases all the time for a single user, right? He might
Yeah.
only be creating those tasks or doing on one things on one database and not using the other database at all, right? But since you are opening at the instance itself, and then it will remain open because it's not closing.
Yeah. True. Yeah, that's it. So I have put different query for each task, and it's doing like. And another thing is, one second. Task.
So talk about the challenges that you faced when you were developing this project.
So first thing I face is to connect to the database. Like I know how to connect it, but to implement this functionality to the database, because I'm using SQL query in Python. So it was a bit different, because when I was fetching the timestamp, so it was a different format for Python, but for MySQL they are asking this specific format, because I have put uh, description as sorry, like data type as a date time. Yeah.
Right.
So which is only accepting this format. So that was the biggest challenge for me. So I need to do lots of googling, and
Can I see?
another.
Can I see the import statements on the top?
Sorry.
Yeah, this one.
Date time.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
was that your system date format? Was that the format which is asking you to put enter there? Yes,
No, no, no.
I don't much have idea about the MySQL, but looks like if your system date format is like that, like a short date format or long date format, whatever in your system date, might be MySQL is looking to have those all the date time values should be matched with your format in your culture variable, whatever your global culture variable for your system. Looks like that's what I'm guessing just.
No, like I researched too much, but MySQL is accepting only this format, so I have to convert it in like through Python. It is very easy to change any format to this format.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good.
One thing that I think we all should take away from this is that whenever we're working on a project or any new thing, we should be okay and apt at using online resources, whether it's documentation or Google. Everyone does it, and you need to sort of learn how to use those resources, especially something like Stack Overflow. I'm sure you took some help
Yes.
from that as well. These
I think
resources are very important.
And one more thing I want, since we are on the topic of SQL, right? There's a very good library in Python called SQL Alchemy, right? So what it does is it helps you model your database through the code itself. So you don't have to create the tables through a lengthy process. It's in the object-oriented language that you create those tables. So give it a shot.
Okay.
It's what most of the enterprise use when they're working with Python. SQL Alchemy is really good in terms of object-oriented database programming. Right now, you are basically writing strings, right? Insert this into as a SQL statement. You don't need to do that. It's in the object-oriented. It's a library, right? So you can use it as a functional library and insert those things and make connections and get the results out as well. So it works really well with pandas. Right? So give it a shot.
What it calls?
SQL Alchemy.
Hi Sumit, this is Joy. I used it in my code. It
Very
worked
nice.
for a while. It worked for a while, and then a couple of days ago, it crashed on me. So I'm not sure if, like, I tried various ways. I tried installing again using pip install. I was getting errors. So then I just commented it in my code.
Got it. So what version of Python you were using?
I think I'm using 2 point something.
Yeah,
Does it
try
make sense?
3 because SQL Alchemy is really finicky in 2.7, but it works really well in Python versions 3.
Oh.
And by the way, just for a guideline, Python 2.7 is deprecated since Jan 2020. So you will not get any support on Python 2.7 anymore. So if you're using Python 2.7, I would highly recommend shifting to Python 3.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you can take over control.
Okay, so we have a few minutes left. Vishali, do you want to show us how you handled time? Just give us a sort of detailed view of how time is handled on your project.
Yes, I'll share my screen.
Yeah.
After looking at Vikas's project, I feel my project is too simple.
No, that's okay. You are just that is a very good point. You try something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good initiative, right? So you
The
have
good part is that from Vikas project, we learned a lot, right? On how a better implementation can be. So it's not about who is doing better, it's about learning. And that's what we are doing here, right? So it's okay, show whatever you have.
Okay. I've used basic, like this is my main project in which I'm calling a function. I've not made use of classes, but I can do that as well. So when the user logs in, which I'm checking that if it is, it's one sign in or two registration. If he says he wants to like do a sign in, I select one, enter name, sure about my two. Okay, so create a new entry. So I can create a new entry and then so I'm entering the deadline in days, like if I want to, give a deadline of probably 4 days for my task. And I can also select hours if I don't want to give hours, because some task may be only for few hours. So I've given both options. And when I do that, it adds to the to-do list. So
Just a question. So what happens if you give both days and hours? How do you handle that?
yeah, that also is done. That is also handled. It adds to the hours here.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. So going
One
over.
quick question.
Yeah.
If as a user I enter this today, and tomorrow if I want to see my history and see my deadline, will my days change in terms of deadline? Uh, does it tell me how much time left for
Uh,
the task to be completed?
no, I have not included that particular part.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. This is good too.
Yeah, if you're using the time library, then that's very easy to do in Python.
Okay. So the time part I'm handing over here. I'll just show it to you. So here is it asks for deadline, days and hours, and then I'm using here just to add the date time. So I'm adding in using the time delta. So time delta, I'm converting it into int and then adding it to time delta for days plus time delta int of hours.
Okay, so that's good. So you're taking the time, the current time, and then adding the user inputs to it, right? The user inputs of day and the user input of hours.
Yes. I'm appending it to the data frame. I'm just checking if my data frame is empty, because for the first time when I'm adding, that time it could give me error. So first time it checks if it's empty, then it adds the first row. Otherwise it just appends to the list. And this is the exception handling. Like I said, when if my Excel sheet is open and I'm trying to save it, it used to give me error. Now it just gives me could not save. Please make sure the file is not open. And for some other errors, it gives that was not, if like suppose if person is not entering the value properly, then it gives that was not a valid entry, try again. Function is for the user registration.
How many files do you have in total?
Imported files?
Oh no, how many Python files are you working with?
I'm having two.
Two?
One
Okay.
final project, just to just if somebody wants to sign in, then I call this function from this library, and if there is user registration, I call another function from the library.
Okay. Great. Yeah, I think what you did is really good.
Yeah, switch back to the other py.py file, the final project.
Sure.
Where you have a appended the entry to do entry in the you use the writer, right? Excel writer.
Yes. Append part you're talking about?
When you no, I saw somewhere is the writer. Did
Excel
you use
writer
the
I'm
writer?
using for creating a new file.
Okay.
When
from your data
user
set?
uh, please tell me, Hetal.
Yeah, you using the Excel writer for your writing the data set or what?
Yes, I'll just show it to you. I'm using it just
Okay.
to create. When the user registration is done, I create an Excel sheet for the to-do list. So that time I just using writer, creating a new Excel file and
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just saving it.
Good,
That's all.
good, yeah. Yeah. I just catch the writer, so I want to see how you did it. That's real good, yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So I see a lot of Excel files. Are they based on users or are they just for testing purpose?
So they're based on users. Like I'm creating a new Excel file for the to-do list for each user. Like that is what
Right.
Saad had suggested me, but I am also looking for options of doing it in one Excel file and creating multiple sheets for each user.
Yeah.
Generally, try to use CSV format and not Excel format, because basically when you're running the code doesn't need to know that it's an Excel file or a CSV file or a TXT file, right? Uh, is generally Excel is basically is for the user to open and see what's inside. But when you're running a programming, we generally at enterprise level we don't use Excel at all, right? Because of the slower performance.
Okay.
Plus, you're using multiple Excel files. That's going to cause more slower performance if there are multiple users on your program.
Okay. Okay. Submit.
Yeah, and if you have a lot of users, obviously you'll end up with a lot of files. So
Right. Right.
that'll also be challenging.
Yeah. I'll try to do this in CSV as well.
But eventually it's a good try, yeah. It's
Yeah,
really good try.
at least you got to play with the Excel library,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I wanted to do that. That's why. So now I'll shift over to CSV.
Yeah, it's
And,
almost similar, but it's better than the Excel.
Okay.
and make sure when you're updating your project, try to make classes, because that's the whole idea of the project, right? Not to make you learn how to write functionality, but how to structure your project so that you can write any functionality inside whenever you want to, right?
Okay. Right.
It's good. Any questions from the team?
No, I think this is a great project. One thing I will add is that I think around 4 or 5 projects are on GitHub now. So take what you've learned over here, and you can constantly make improvements to your existing projects, and those you can merge them with the GitHub repository, so that everyone can sort of collaborate. And even if you want to suggest a change to someone else's project, you can do that as well if it's already been posted on GitHub. Again, the benefit of GitHub is that we can keep track of who's making the changes and what the changes are. So we can just work towards having a better program in a very collaborative way.
Jonas is saying like I don't know is he or she, but if you have incompleted project, don't worry. You can, if you still want to share with us your thought process, you can do it. Like if is we can help you over there if where you stuck and why it is incompleted because of any errors you're getting or you stuck with something. What?
Yeah, so even if it's incomplete, you can put it on GitHub, and once it is complete, you can update it. But I would suggest that whatever you have, you should definitely put it up on GitHub so we can all look at it.
Do we have time? Any more time?
Yeah, I think the idea is that you go on the GitHub, look at the projects, and see uh, what makes sense. You can help in the improvement process, or you can review other people's code. Right? That's the whole collaborative process. And if two guys want to work together, they can definitely post one project and then work on it collaboratively, remotely, so that you will get well aware of how an enterprise two people can work together, right? That's a good idea as well.
Yep.
And you guys still have more time to work on the project, right? So don't stop right now. At least
And
take.
if any blockers, if any blockers, just send an email as soon as you face a blocker, right? Try
Yes.
researching and Googling. If you are uh, not able to find the answers, let's say in 1 hour, then just post, don't get stuck. Just remove
Yep.
that blocker, post it on the channel and we'll answer it for you.
Yep.
And yeah, while we're answering it, you can work on other functionality as well.
Awesome. That's a very good session today.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you for that.
Yeah.
It was really good and very collaborative. Very interesting. And I'm really happy that we started off these classes with very basic stuff, integers and strings, and people are now finally like making a whole program and putting it together.
Yeah.
So that's really good and it's a lot to be proud of.
Actually, when we decided to do some beginner program, I don't know exactly, but I was looking something like kind of study group what the Jyoti did it. But then Kader suggests, okay, instead of doing that kind of the personalized kind of study group, we can create the like kind of separate track for it, and then that's end up it's really good. Yeah.
Nice.
Great, guys. I would suggest at least spend 1 more week on this, perfecting the projects if you've already completed them, and if they're incomplete, complete them and upload them on GitHub so we can all look at them and collaborate with them.
All right. Sounds good then. I think we're nearing the end of the session. Any questions, any feedback from the group? All right then. Thanks everyone for your time.
Good night.
And try to work on the projects, and then we might have another session for the review, the next one, if we see there are more projects posted on GitHub. If not, then we'll keep you posted on what's the next.
Great.
All right.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.